This is Tarkov Tales, a channel dedicated to the lore and story aspects of the Escape from Tarkov universe. This video focuses on one of the biggest mysteries in Tarkov. What exactly were the mysterious company TerraGroup researching, and why were they so interested in the Tarkov region? I'll try and summarise what we know, and then my thoughts on what it all means. If you want some background, you can watch my History of Tarkov video, which is linked in the description. We know that TerraGroup is involved with biological and chemical research. We can see the remnants of their operation all over Tarkov, and every location we visit has some form of TerraGroup presence. Most notable of these areas is the TerraGroup Labs, a secret location buried deep underground somewhere in Tarkov, an area where all of their research and development went on, as well as medical experiments, as evidenced by the numerous medical wings and beds scattered throughout the lab. In almost every area of the medical wing, we find various types of injectors, all of which are loaded with an array of drugs and chemicals. Some are familiar, such as morphine or even adrenaline, but some we come across are military issue, such as propofol and zagostin, both powerful stimulants that increase the user's resistance to pain and blood loss. These drugs by themselves are probably not too out of place in the lab. A PMC group operating within the ranks of TerraGroup would have access to this kind of equipment, but looking further, we can see a whole new class of injector stimulant emerge from the research in the lab. These powerful combat drugs were developed by TerraGroup Labs specifically for enhancing a regular soldier's abilities. The drugs themselves are wide-ranging and cover a range of physical and mental enhancements, from stemming bleeding to increasing the user's ability to lift and carry more weight. They are no doubt a powerful edge for anyone in a combat situation, but can lead to serious long-term side effects if used for a prolonged period. Through our interactions with Peacekeeper, he tasks us with investigating these stimulants and where they came from, which leads us to uncover the man in charge of the Scav raider gangs at the Shoreline Medical Resort. Sanitar was actually one of the scientists in charge of developing these drugs. We learn he was an infectious disease specialist in the lab, so we investigate further to find a flash drive in his office. We bring this to Peacekeeper, who tells us, "We decoded this flash drive. There's a lot of important information there, but I can't tell you everything. Confidentially, I can tell you about Sanitar. He's a scientist. He studied drugs and created them, and tested them upon people. Very bold, or as it's sometimes known, not ethical research." So now we know that TerraGroup were developing experimental drugs in the Tarkov area, and we're using them to experiment on people to study the effects. We know that one of these scientists still roams the area with an armed escort, dispensing these experimental drugs to the local populace, and that he was an infectious disease specialist. Could the Tarkov area be a testbed for experimental drugs that TerraGroup wants to test covertly? In addition to the reports of Sanitar dispensing drugs to the locals around the shoreline area, we also learned from our dealings with the hunter known as Jaeger that he's seen some of the victims of Sanitar before, remarking, "Once they go crazy, there's no turning back. You can only shoot them, like mad dogs." Can we infer from this that the drugs cause some form of psychosis? One of the last parts of information I was able to dig up is about TerraGroup's chemical refining and the hazardous materials they have been producing. When we accept the vitamins quest from Skier, he tells us once we're successful that the substance recovered is extremely toxic and almost killed the scientists he has working on it. He seems to think that it is in some way related to the barrels of blue ice that have been spotted in numerous locations around the Tarkov region. Upon investigating, we can indeed see many small barrels marked with the TerraGroup logo and the words "Blue Ice." You can see these barrels at almost every location across Tarkov, but you can also find giant tanks labelled with Blue Ice in the customs zone, sat ready to be shipped in one of the old warehouses near the bunker extraction. The only other place these tanks appear is in the warehouse of the labs. They were added to the game with patch 12.7 and the customs expansion. So what can we make from all of this? My thoughts about the reasons for TerraGroup's actions and their intentions in the Tarkov area are that they were heavily into biomedical and chemical warfare. The lab was used as a research and development facility to develop the combat stimulants, which were then subsequently tested on either the local inhabitants, TerraGroup's own security forces, or finally the PMC troops. The reason for using Tarkov as the area specifically for their operation was that it was a legal grey zone. They were able to acquire land with minimal investment and little questions asked, and conduct their own private business without the direct oversight of any government organisation, all under the protection of a well-stocked and funded PMC. In addition to the development of these combat stimulants, it is quite clear that TerraGroup are also responsible for the production of extremely hazardous chemicals that pose a definite danger to life. The blue ice barrels are a worrying sign that whatever TerraGroup's activities were, they were abandoned very hastily. Considering the amount of blue ice tanks in the customs area, this was a large operation, intended for some form of mass use or distribution. Could it be that TerraGroup were planning to do something like release this strange chemical into the water supply? My conclusion is not definite. We are still kept in the dark about the ultimate reason for all of the fighting, but my hypothesis is that TerraGroup were responsible for the production of full-spectrum chemical enhancement and biological warfare capabilities. The drugs and chemicals they produced were tested heavily among the population of Tarkov and their own forces, leading to many cases of combat psychosis and PTSD, coupled with long-term dependency on the experimental drugs. I believe Tarkov was used as a testing ground for perfecting these substances to have minimal negative impact on the user and allow them to be mass-produced and distributed to the USEC PMC as a way to consolidate their power and give them the edge over the other groups operating worldwide. The fact that they were also interested in developing dangerous chemicals intended for offensive use leads me to believe that they also intended to supply this to USEC to aid in that consolidation of power, and would also explain why they are so desperate to keep it a secret. It is quite clear that without the intervention of the Russian security services, that the research would have continued and this evidence would have undoubtedly been destroyed. It would also explain the mass panic and evacuation of TerraGroup staff, as well as the atrocities that were committed in the wake of the first raids and standoffs. It has since then become a battleground where USEC troops try to destroy evidence of their and TerraGroup's misdeeds, and the Bear PMC tries to stop them. This leads me to my final point. Despite the fact that TerraGroup's research activities were cut short, the evacuation of most of their staff and the ensuing conflict could actually all be part of their plan. The war between PMCs and the local populace would have yielded a goldmine of data and information for their staff to collect. The long-term effects of both the chemical exposure and the combat stimulants could be studied and field tested. The Tarkov region is locked off from the outside world, but even with media blackouts and the like, there must still be interested parties looking in from the outside. The answer to this mystery has not yet been made clear, but my feeling is that the chemicals are connected to the wider conflict in Tarkov, and that the area itself was and is still being used as a testing ground not only for TerraGroup, but also for big business in general, funneling arms and drugs into the area with minimal oversight, infecting not only the local residents, but also the operators fighting in the conflict zone, keeping them perpetually fighting. The ultimate reason is still unclear, but as the old saying goes, war is good for business. Even better if that war is controllable on a micro scale. What if the whole of Tarkov was just a blueprint for future armed conflicts worldwide? These are just my thoughts on the biggest mystery in Tarkov. I've tried to come up with an explanation that doesn't lean on tropes such as, oh, it was just zombies, or something obvious. All of the other information was taken from item and quest descriptions, as well as the lore megathread on the official forums that you can find linked in the description. Information is still scarce, so here's hoping we get some more detail with Raid Episode 5 and the upcoming patches. What are your thoughts on TerraGroup's research? Is there something I've missed? Let me know in the comments.